our next discussion here. This is going to be all about what we call barbarians at the head unit. Who is going to take over that center stack, or what kind of a peace will they make with each other? Here's our panel. I want to bring them on one by one and end up with our moderator. First of all, please welcome from Cloud Car, their CEO, Konstantin Offmer. Konstantin, come on up. From Mojio, we have their CEO, Giraud. Over at NVIDIA, a name that needs no introduction, we have Danny Shapiro, Senior Director of Automotive. And to lead these guys in a discussion, joining us from HARMAN, from their AHA Streaming and Cloud Services Division, please welcome our moderator, Rahul Misra.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate being here and being invited to speak. And we got a distinguished panel here. Sounds like our host actually answered the question, though. Who's actually going to win in this race? Is it Apple and Google, or is it the OEMs? I guess I'll throw it out to.
I mean, I think it's the drivers, it's the passengers in the vehicle, and they're going to have access to all kinds of information. There's going to be systems inside the car that are connected and can do much more and work in ways better than your mobile phone can. But at the same time, you have that device with your personal life, then that will integrate much better than it does today inside the vehicle. So like we said, there will be both, and the customer is going to benefit in the end.
Yeah, it's a fragmented market already as you look at, how many different makes and models there are, and I think the in-car experience or the connected car experience is going to be pretty fragmented because people own cars for 7 to 11, 12 years these days. 2025 is going to see half of the cars on the road then are on the road right now. So I think lots and lots of consumer choice is definitely the word of the day here.
Well, at the end of the day, as we heard in the last panel, the automakers are very interested in their brand and having a deeply integrated, connected experience. And there's this idea that the data lives on your phone. It really doesn't. The data lives in the cloud. You can access it through your PC, through a web browser, mouse and keyboard. You can access it through your phone, pinch and zoom type of interface. And what you really need is an OEM way of bringing all those services into the car in a driver-appropriate, safe, and integrated way. And that's what we provide to the manufacturers. It's their car. When you say you buy a phone, you say, well, I buy an iPhone or an Android. And so we kind of know who rules there. But to your point, when you buy a car, you say, I buy a Ford, or I buy a Jaguar Land Rover, or I buy a Honda. You don't say, I buy an Android-driven head unit. And so it's the automaker's world, and our goal is to empower the automakers to build a great branded experience that gives you safe access to all your services.
I guess I only challenge you, Konstantin, is just, we've been doing this, I think all of us have been doing this for many, many years, right? And it's really taken this one force to kind of bring it all together to a head. And has the industry failed in that respect? Do you think people would actually use that, or do you think people gravitate more naturally towards using the smartphone paradigms?
Well, I'm glad you're picking on me. That's great. I'd say a few things. The auto industry has a very difficult challenge that we've heard about, which is the long development cycle of the cars. So the cars that are hitting the road now were designed 4 years ago. And right now, the automakers are trying to figure out what to do 4 years from now. That's a very difficult challenge. And they're not, today's world, the way they're building cars, it would be like if you're trying to build an e-commerce site, and you say, well, the first thing I got to do is build a computer. Then I've got to build a web browser. And then I've got to build a website. And that's the way head units are being built. Our view is, over time, the automakers are going to focus much more on just that differentiated piece, on how to get all the experiences that the user wants under the surfaces of their car in a great, safe, driver-appropriate way. And that starts shifting the way the industry works. And a great example is Tesla today. When you get in a Tesla, you don't say, my gosh, I wish I had CarPlay or Android Automotive. It's actually a great driver experience. It could be better, but it's appropriate for that car. There's things that appear in the instrument cluster. There's things that appear in the head unit. There's obviously opportunities to put things in a heads-up display. And that's what the automakers want. They just need an easy way to deliver that. And that's been challenging today based on how the industry is structured. And we see a big change happening there so that they can deliver that experience.
And that's a great point. It's turned into a software game. It's all about software. I mean, we're a hardware company, But the reality is we're more of a software company today than we've ever been. We have twice the number of software engineers as hardware engineers. And what Tesla has been so successful at doing is updating that car on a regular basis, adding new capabilities, new features, new experiences. The hardware in the Model S that we work with them on, it's the same that's been shipping for 2.5 years. But people who are buying the car today are getting new experiences. And the people who bought the car 2 years ago get that update to give them these new capabilities. And so that's the model that I think we're all going to start seeing much more of throughout other brands. And it's what we announced with Audi today, is the ability to continually update the software in the car to add new capabilities. And that's how we're going to close that gap.
The challenge, though, I think is, so I like what you said, you know, this is the Connected Car Expo. And I bet most of us in this audience, and we're all automotive, you know, executives or professionals who are in the automotive space, probably have a relatively new car, and yet most of us actually don't have a connected car. Some of us might have a connected infotainment system, but the car already from 1996 to today is a rolling computer with hundreds of sensors and millions of lines of code that is not accessible to the driver. I think it's not the car maker's game. I think it's the consumer's game. So how do we actually give people a connected car, turn their existing cars or their new cars into an environment where they can use applications and have their car ambiently and seamlessly connect with the world around them? And you know, I would actually love to take a survey here and put up your hand if you're going to buy a car in the next 5 years. So about 1/5 to about 1/7 of the people in the room. So between now and 2020, the vast majority of this room isn't actually going to buy a new car. So how do we really give people a connected car experience with the cars that they already have and let those supercomputers behind the dashboard access the apps on their phone, connect to more apps, talk to the parking meters and the traffic lights and the buildings around them and their friends and family and make them safer without having to replace their car? And I think that's the question that we always ask.
You're differentiating then between like the new car experience versus the existing car market then, right? So that there can be two different paradigms essentially is what you're advocating.
You could drive a hard line between the 800 million cars with a computer in them today, of which 2/3 of them are going to be on the road for the next 10 years, and all the new cars with Android and CarPlay, which is obviously where all the press and the media is. But you could also say, what's going to bridge that? And what's going to create the seamless experience from the 2008 whatever that you have now, and download those apps to your phone or to your dashboard and have a connected car experience, and then move gracefully into your new car whenever you're going to buy that, and continue to have that same open platform connected car experience. So now that's what Mojio is all about, if you're wondering.
So I guess I'll throw this out here. Now, I have just two comments. Is that, you know, I definitely do like Tesla, and I'm not trying to pick on Tesla. I think the market for 100,000 plus cars is very limited. But I do know that bringing the smartphone in the car is a tough experience. I mean, we've measured this. You're not getting more than 10, 15% of people. I think with CarPlay and Android Auto, you may get more, but you're not going to get significantly more. So when you do something on an embedded basis that the customer doesn't have to pay for, that's the key thing, you will get high usage. But I do agree with you that there is a market, Jay, for all the cars that are out that exist today, whether they be here, you know, overseas. People aren't turning cars over quickly enough. So I do agree with that. I guess, you know, do you guys think that CarPlay and Android Auto are actually good for the industry? And if so, why? Or if so, not why?
I think that depends if they allow third-party apps in their vast ecosystems to be usable while driving or when they're not in the car, but in a very safe way. So I've assumed that Android and CarPlay are going to have another layer of app certification. So there's a certification layer to get your app into the Apple App Store, and that there may be another one before you're allowed to have your connected car Apple app be displayable on the in-car dashboard. I've never heard anything about that, but I've assumed that.
No, and clearly, I think both sides have basically said it's appropriate apps. So it's not going to be any app on your phone playing on the head unit. But again, I think if we can create a better, safer environment, people are, I mean, pretty much everybody in this room, I'm willing to bet, is guilty of using their phone while they're driving. And we all know it's not safe. There's a great new book out called A Deadly Wandering, which, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it, and it'll get you to stop texting while you're driving. But if we can create a way that people can access these devices safer using steering wheel controls or using a touch screen in the car or using voice, ideally, and have it work seamlessly, it's going to make everybody safer. So from that standpoint, it's a good workaround. And again, having these systems integrated into the car really means that people are going to be paying better attention while they're driving.
Yeah, I think championing the consumer is maybe the obvious way to go. Consumers will continue to use their phones unsafely while driving, and I've done enough of these panels to ask the audience how many of you use Google Maps while driving, and usually about, I'm not going to survey you guys again, but usually about 4/5 of the audience will put up their hands. So how do we, given that it's going to keep happening, the smartphone will continue to be the telematics interface while driving. Thankfully, the screens are getting bigger, so that's a good thing. But how do we empower that app usage to be safer, to be hands-free, to be more intuitive, to seamlessly deliver results while you're driving so that you don't have to touch your phone while you're doing it? Because the fact is, most cars just don't have a touchscreen in them. And even if they did, touching it while driving is probably not a good idea.
So absolutely, they're going to be fantastic experiences. But I think one analogy that's worth looking at, if you look at media in the car today, Sirius XM has been built into cars since 2001. Then the iPod came out and everybody said, boy, Sirius is dead. No one's going to be paying $15 a month for radio when I can just play stuff off my iPod. Then Bluetooth came out. Everybody said, oh my gosh, Sirius XM is dead. I'm going to play all my stuff off of my smartphone. Why would I pay $15 a month for radio when I can just play all this off of my phone? And it turns out Sirius has continued at essentially the same penetration, the same take rate, and it's still an absolutely great service, must-have service in the car, even with all these other approaches. So I think there will be lots of approaches. I think CarPlay will be great. Android Automotive will be great. But over time, the automaker wants to create a great, differentiated, simple, driver-appropriate experience. And that's what's going to win in the long term. That's what people want. You get in the car, it's simple, it works, it gives you access to all your services in a safe way, it uses the multiple surfaces of the car, the automaker can differentiate and brand those so they come from the automaker, and that's the ultimate long-term experience. It's just a question of how we best get there.
But how do we deal with two different makes and models in the driveway? So I've got one, maybe I've got apps A, B, and C in my Volkswagen, and my wife has apps D, E, and F in her Honda, because I'm a road warrior and she's a commuter, so we have completely different needs, so we need different apps. How do I move seamlessly in and out of our two cars, plus my rental car, and have a consistent connected car experience no matter what car I'm in? Well, I think that's the challenge that the automakers have yet to really have any answer for.
Well, I'm glad we're on this panel together. So I think at least we have an answer, or believe we have an answer, which is you take your identity with you, and the identity can come from the phone. The services live in the cloud. And so people get confused. You know, the service does not live on your phone. Everything on your phone, just about everything, maybe not Angry Birds, but everything on your phone that really matters, you can also access through a web browser. And really what you need is a safe way to access those same services from your car in a driver-safe, driver-appropriate way, using your voice, keeping your hands on the wheel, keeping your eyes on the road. And your identity comes with you. But if you're in a different car, if you're in a Mercedes, they have beautiful dash with screens here, center stack, heads-up display, and you want to use all those surfaces for those experiences. If it's a low-end car, maybe it just sits in the center console. But that's really how the manufacturer can differentiate their brand. But at the end of the day, the services come from the cloud, and you just need safe access to them.
I guess, Jay, I don't pick on Constantine here, but I'll pick on you on this one. So, which is just, I like what you're doing with Mojio. But do you think that as we go along here and more cars come with CarPlay and Android Auto, are people that are building, and I'm not just talking guys like yourself, but also the OEMs that also have app stores, do you think those are going to, is there a place for those? And how do you succeed in that type of marketplace?
Is there a place for the?
Any type of app store, and any type of app framework, essentially, right? Is there a place for that in the cars, given CarPlay and Android Auto?
Well, absolutely, but I guess we should define app store. So Mojio has an app store, and, well, I forgot to pull it out here. Really, so this is my car in Vancouver, and you can see that it's an amber screen, which means I actually have a diagnostic issue with my car right now. I have a catalyst system efficiency problem, P0420, DTC. And I can show you my car is in Vancouver, and I'm connected to it in real time all the time. And I can go in here, and I can look at some third-party apps like Good Coins, which is a driver rewards app, and I can or Glimpse. I can download that app. And what it's doing now that I downloaded that app is it's jumping me to the iOS App Store. So Mojio is really not an app store per se, but it's a filter of Mojio-enabled smartphone apps or web apps or Android apps or whatever that you are connecting that app to the data streaming from your car, which you can empower any car from '96 to today to do with a OBD device from Mojio. So it's an AT&T powered 3G device. So yes, but it's not really an app store. It's really a filter for all the Mojio powered apps in the App Store. So you can discover those apps and customize your connected car experience on any car that you have.
But I think to your point, having an app store, is already happening brand by brand. We just announced with Honda in Europe an Android-based head unit. So it's running on our processor, mobile processor, Android running natively in the car, and Honda has their app center that you can go and, again, curated content, download. There's no modem in the car, so you use the modem on your phone, though, to put things in the vehicle.
That's funny. Is actually we were part of that. The AHA is part of that particular platform. I didn't realize that was coming from NVIDIA. I guess you see it, Daniel, from both sides, right? I mean, you see it both from the smartphone as well as from the embedded side. I guess, will there be some commoditization then? Will you need advanced graphics? I mean, for an Apple CarPlay or an Android Auto, is there a need for that if they're all doing the same thing?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, we're all about delivering a premium experience, and I think we've all seen systems where you touch the screen and there's a lag, and you go and you touch it again and now it catches up and you've gone 2 screens down, and talk about driver distraction, or you pinch and zoom and things are slow. So we're all about putting processing power in the car to deliver a great experience. I think we're going to see higher resolution screens. That requires more processing power. If we kind of go back to the lowest common denominator, which is what some of these systems are doing, it doesn't require a lot of processing. But then what we're doing is delivering systems that can drive multiple screens. So lowering the cost to the tier 1 and the OEM by having these multi-screen systems, clusters, infotainment, maybe rear seat, and head-up displays. So again, a single powerful processor can drive multiple screens rather than having many processors.
So do you see this as a positive? Is that kind of driving what you're seeing from an NVIDIA standpoint in terms of the displays?
It is. I mean, it's changing dynamics, and that's really what we're all about, is figuring out how do we continue to grow our business. And now we're developing systems where, again, you can have the head unit or a mobile device sort of throw content to different screens, or play movies in the back seat while you're doing something, with navigation in the front seat. So all off a single system.
Okay. And I guess, Constantine, I mean, I'll ask you this: is, given what Daniel was talking about, do you, is it wise for the OEM to be putting a lot of horsepower into their radio, right? Or is it better for it to be driven from the smartphone? I mean, what do you see as being the benefit or trade-offs of, those two approaches? Because that's what seems like Apple and Google are trying to do versus what the OE has tried to do.
There seems to be this attitude of sort of this one-size-fits-all approach. It'd be like sitting up here and going, we've got a 4-cylinder engine. Why don't we just build every car with a 4-cylinder engine? The automakers, everyone has a very different brand, and they want to have that brand show through in their styling, how you approach the car from the outside as well as from the inside of the car. And so there's absolutely room for very high-end experiences where you have very high-end rendered graphics that appear multiple places with heads-up displays. You'll see all kinds of new technologies in the screens, rear seat, and you'll also have the car makers that don't even necessarily want a screen, and they say, great, if I can just use what's on the phone, then it saves me money on a map and on whatever else, and it can show up in a little rectangle there. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and what's important is that the automaker's brand shows through so that there are differentiated experiences for the different segments that the automakers address.
You talked a lot about the branding, Constantine, and I guess I'll ask all the panelists are they worried about losing their brand identity? Do some of them fear Apple and Google, or are they more open? I mean, I guess I've seen a mix. I've seen a few that have said, we tried to do it in the past with building certain apps or building certain functionality, and we're kind of giving up. And you know what, Apple and Google, this is the way we're going to go. Where others, I think, are a little bit more cautious, a little more, I mean, what do you feel is the tone from the OE partners that you guys are talking with?
Well, I think the vast majority of people are buying $15,000 to $30,000 cars. And I hope that we see some of these embedded car systems trickle down into the more common everyday cars that the vast majority of consumers out there buy. But I don't think that the car makers are really making what consumers want, because they would have to give up that brand control. They would have to give up their proprietary stovepipe solution in order to give consumers what they really want. People are intensely wed to their smartphones, and that's only going to continue with their smartphones being the digital hub for absolutely everything, to their smartwatch, their home automation system, their thermostat. and eventually their car and their friends and family and whatnot. So how do the automakers walk that fine line between giving consumers what they really want while not losing the brand? And frankly, I don't have an answer for that.
Well, I mean,
I think on your point, though, as the price of cars for the mass market it's not the high-end premium brands. You're absolutely right. But we see the demand for these embedded systems coming down into those price points. I mean, like I said, Honda Civic, is now using the same processor that's in that Tesla Model S, right? And developing these systems that can have long life. And they're all taking the approach that they want to make it flexible. So they're building it to take advantage of CarPlay, Android Auto, and whatever system that they're developing in-house, and to give the customers that flexibility. And like I said before, the software is what's going to let them continue to keep it relevant.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a mistake to equate a branded approach with saying it's a stovepipe and it's not flexible and it doesn't give you access to your services. I mean, in a Model S, you get access to a lot of services. They show up different places. They can show up here. They can show up here. It's a very flexible system. So it's a mistake to say that it's either the automaker's way or something else. The automaker is trying to create a great product for their end user. And the question is, how do they go about doing that? And saying that everybody's going to have the exact same experience in their car when it comes to accessing your services is just not the way this is going to play out. If you've got a heads-up display and a text message comes in, you're going to want to see that on your heads-up display, not in some center console on a small screen. And the automaker should have the ability to do that. We have to think about, how do I create much better experiences? How do I make the existing services appear much better in your car than they appear on your phone? I mean, just think about the car today, actually. The primary use of your phone, the phone call, is actually better in your car. You're sitting there, you've got a nice quiet environment, you've got great speakers, you've got great microphones, at least in a high-end car, and I see people sit in a parking lot and finish their call in the car, rather than get out of the car and have a little teeny device next to their ear that's radiating. So I think you really need to rethink the world and not say, look, we're confined to what's on my phone, I really want what's on my phone. That's actually, first of all, not even true. It's in the cloud. And second of all, you have this wonderful set of opportunities inside the car, at least 3 screens, the heads-up display, the instrument cluster, the center stack. How can I use those resources to make my services daylight to my car in a great, orchestrated, driver-appropriate, voice-controlled way? Well, that requires rethinking some of the basic things. Just like when we moved from a PC to a tablet. Tablets were around since the early 90s. And it wasn't until Apple came through and rethought that experience and said, look, it's not about menus that you pull down with a stylus and windows that you move back and forth on the tablet. It's really about a new paradigm. It's about pinch and zoom, a new type of interface. So that was now the second major way of accessing your services, through a keyboard and mouse or through a touch tablet. We need that same thing for the car, and it can be much better than what you're seeing today.
Yeah, and I'll just take your comment. I mean, I do think that it's all positive, because I think if we as an industry look at it and say, boy, we used to compete against the other car manufacturers, the other tier 1s or other services, and now you're saying, look, here's Apple CarPlay, here's Google. We're not just competing against other tier 1s or other OEMs, we're competing against them as well. And I think that's really where we push the industry forward and say we can make this a great experience that's branded, yet still brings in the services that customers want. Now, I see the 2-minute mark here. I don't know if there's any questions, if anybody in the audience wants to ask any questions. I see somebody running up here.
Paul Kaminsky from Radio World. I've got a question for everybody on the panel. Do you ever see the day that terrestrial radio, whether it be AM or FM, will be gone from any of these connected car systems that you'll see in the car? And if they're not relevant right now, what does that industry need to do to make it relevant so it's up there, the choice that somebody wants to make?
I'll take one quick stab at it. Is that I don't think they will go away until we can get a connected car system that can instantly play music at the push of a button. That's my wife desires. Whenever I show her any of the connected stuff that I do, she's always like, wow, it took more than a second. I'm sorry, I'm not going to use it. So that's the type of audience I think we're dealing with. It's not the smart nerds like that you see in this panel here.
It's only going to go away in the car when it goes away in your home.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
as long as we're still broadcasting, people will listen in their car.
I'm really glad you brought up radio. It's the #1 app in the car. AM, FM, radio, and Sirius, if you extend to that, you know, by use, that is the killer app in the car today. What will happen in the future, what you really want is one-touch access to your media, so that's a big part of the content industry. And AM, FM is driven by advertising, $14 billion a year in the US. In advertising, about $8 billion of that is attributed to the car. Today, that is broadcast. It's one size fits all. It's not interactive. It's not personalized. So I think there's some really interesting ways that media consumption will change over time. I don't know what that means particularly for AM, FM, but for content and for advertising, I think over time those will start being delivered in a much more driver-appropriate and driver-centric way. There's so much great content out there that you'd love to consume in the car. And this is also another example where the car is very different than your phone. People aren't going, gosh, I can't wait till my phone has AM, FM radio. It's a different experience. You need to rethink what that driver experience is from first principles. An AM, FM radio and Sirius and how you access all your media and your content that's really targeted is a tremendous opportunity that doesn't really exist on the phone.
So I'm not sure who's next.
Oh, hi, Lynn Walford with Auto Connected Car News. Say I have a Mojio in my car, or Android Auto running, or Apple CarPlay, and then I get this distressing message that causes an accident. Who is liable? Or if something goes wrong with one of these systems. And I'm going 70 miles an hour at the time, of course.
Well, you're speeding.
Not in California.
So I'll take part of that, and that's a very dangerous question to lead off, certainly with an answer. And I'll give you a partial answer. As far as the liability, and I don't know that the courts have figured that out exactly. One of the things we do in the way our system works is we actually model the driver's cognitive workload. So we know where you are, we know what you're doing, we know what's going on around you. There can be vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure. These things are all on the roadmap, of course, but we know a lot about you and your experience as it's happening. And we orchestrate that experience. So that's part of being driver appropriate. You know, when does that text message come in? It doesn't have to come in the second your phone receives it. If you're in the middle of a turn and your nav system is saying, you know, take a right in 100 yards, we can hold that off. If it's a slippery road and you're in a school zone, that can wait. So part of the way our system works is at least we give those controls to the manufacturers as part of their experience to make that safe. Where that ends up in the courts and everything else, it's hard to speculate at this time.
Jason, she picked on you. I'd say you should answer that question.
So if you're using your phone in a state where phone usage while you're driving is illegal, then the driver's liable. It's pretty simple. And so to answer your question about app usage, if you're using a Mojio third-party enabled app that is intended for being used while driving, then we certify their apps to be completely or near completely hands-free, far easier than dialing a radio station while driving. So that the app is contextually aware of your needs, is receiving data from your car and your phone to know exactly where you are and what you're doing, and disables many of the buttons while driving. So to put it in example, BMW actually lets you enter addresses in their nav system while you drive, which is unbelievable to me, instead of disabling some of those buttons while you drive. And Mojio disables those in the apps that are allowed to run on the Mojio platform.
And I guess my answer would probably be is it's less the liability than who's going to get the lawsuit. And it'll probably be, I'm sure they'll name everybody, Apple, Google, Mojio, and the car company, right? So NVIDIA is safe because nobody knows that it's there. They're hidden in the background.
I'm just glad to be compared to Apple and Google.
I guess there's one more comment there, and we talked to a number of the developers. They're actually very concerned about that as well. Certainly, the really big brands, you know, they don't want to see a car wrapped around a tree with, you know, their logo and their app on the screen, right? And so part of what I've been talking about is how do you refactor sort of the millions of apps and take the pieces of them that are driver appropriate and kind of tilt them on their head and say, look, there's really just a few things that really matter to the driver, which is around locations and points of interest. It's around communicating, and that's messaging or phone calls, and it's around media. And rather than saying, okay, there's a million apps, let's say those are the 3 components that the driver is interested in. How do you contribute from your app to those experiences? And when you work through it, most of the things can fit pretty well into that. You don't want, you know, all of, I don't want to name a specific social network, but you don't want to be, you know, posting and editing photos and that kind of thing. But you do want to be able to communicate with the people that you were just communicating with. So it's how do you daylight the parts of those applications that are specific to the driver and bring those into the car in a safe way. I think that's the key opportunity.
So I don't know if there's time for another question, or is that, I think we're done. We're done. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rahul, and thanks to his panel.